Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the online ISP forum for Thursday, April 18th, 2013. My name is Dan McCloy. I'm part of the team that provides supports throughout Oregon on person-centered practices in the 24-hour comprehensive ISP planning process, and we're glad that you can join us today. This webinar is being brought to you by the Oregon Technical Assistance Corporation. OTAC has been providing training and technical assistance to professionals and citizens concerned about intellectual and developmental disabilities since 1984. OTAC is available to answer 24-hour ISP process questions. If you have any questions or comments after today's forum, you can reach us at www.otac.org/ISP/support or at 503-428-5435. Participants in today's forum can submit questions through the chat box on the webinar control panel anytime during the presentation. We'll have time for a short question and answer session at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded to share with others who weren't able to attend live today. Your telephones and microphones have been muted for this call. The recording of today's forum will be posted later today on the OTAC website. Today, Alan Lytle from the Individual Support Planning team here at OTAC will walk us through the new PICA protocol. He'll also discuss things to keep in mind when discontinuing a support document or a risk. We'll also have another round of ISP Mythbusters, followed by time for your questions. So I thank you for being with us, and I'll turn it over to Alan.
Hi everyone, good morning. Glad to be with you today. This, what in Salem is trying to be a sunny Thursday. I'm excited to spend a little bit of time with you today to review the new PICA protocol. We're also going to talk about some things to think about when you're discontinuing a risk or you're thinking about discontinuing a risk or removing supports. We'll talk about that. In January, we introduced our new Mythbusters segment, ISP Mythbusters. We've got a couple more myths to bust today, so I look forward to doing that a little later this hour. And we should have a little time for your questions before we wrap up at 11 o'clock today. So again, glad you're all here with us. Such a great turnout today for the webinar. Let's jump right on into the PICA protocol. Let me talk about this PICA protocol. It was developed and it was released in February of this year. It was developed by the DD Health Issues Advisory Committee, which is led by Arlene Holmes. She's a nurse at ODDS, the Office of Developmental Disability Services at the state. And I believe the goal of that group was to identify common support needs around the issue of PICA, which is a very important issue that some of the people that we support experience, and assembling those support needs into a protocol format that we all recognize and that our direct support staff already understand. So that's what they did. I was very grateful that they asked for contribution from OTAC as well, and I was able to sit at the table with them. We had some great conversations about some of the points on the protocol. I look forward to reviewing it with you. So you can download the form at otac.org/ISP/forms. If you scroll down about halfway down the page, you'll see PICA protocol and a link to be able to click and download that. Just wanted to note that there is only the standard or handwritten version of the form available. There is not a template available for this protocol, and there's currently no plans to develop that, but you should find everything you need within the standard version of the form that is available. So let's just jump in and walk through. And so I'm going to actually switch my screen over to the PICA protocol inside Word so that we can actually walk through it a little easier. So just when you step back and look at it, it should look really familiar to you with, as I mentioned, that it already follows the layout and formatting that you would expect with the other Fatal 4 protocols, which have been published for quite some time. So you're going to see that familiar description of the issue at the top. You'll see Section 1 is preventative steps. Section 2 has those signs and symptoms. Section 3, what to do if any signs and symptoms are observed. Section 4 has that urgent response instructions. Now, if you'll bear with me, I know a number of people right now are experiencing allergy issues, and I've got this little tickle in my throat from allergies, so bear with me as I try not to cough too much in your ears during today's conversation. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on this form so you can see it a little better, and let's just walk through from the top. So right at the very top, you'll notice that this PICA, the word PICA in the title is, as you might remember from the seizure protocol, you can actually change this word right up at the top. Now, why might you want to change that? I'll tell you, what we had in mind when we ended up recommending that this be able to be changed by you, we were thinking about situations where a person might not have a formal diagnosis of PICA, or perhaps you want to use this protocol even for somebody who puts inedible objects in their mouth, even though they may not have a history of actually swallowing them. So, excuse me. So you have the ability to name this in a way that will make sense to your staff. If you want to continue to keep it as PICA, you can keep it that way, or you can name it in whatever way is intuitive for the staff to know what it's for. If you remember, that's always our objective with support documents, to make sure that support staff understand what they need to do to prevent a problem and then how to respond if the problem happens. So you have that ability to name it in a way that makes sense. Great. You've got other familiar things such as the person's name, where is this being used, and the date. Just a quick, I always look for opportunities to remind you of core pieces of support documents. That location of use is a good reminder that that support documents are always tailored to the location where they're used. So we don't want to just see a PICA protocol that's for home and work, for example, if the person goes to work, but it would be a tailored protocol to each location. Then there's the date. Just a quick reminder that with support documents, that date should always reflect the most recent date that this was modified. So it's always the last time you made changes to it. I've actually had several conversations, and this is a quick sidebar, but I've had a couple of conversations recently with folks who still believe that every protocol and every support document needs to be opened every year and redated at the time of the ISP. And just a reminder that that's not the expectation. You only need to reopen and change the date if there's something that needs to be changed on that support document. And I'm sure with our May ISP forum with Terry Rittner, where we're scheduled to be talking more about support documents, I'm sure we'll be reminding you of that point then as well. Okay, let's continue with the PICA protocol. Thanks for that quick sidebar. So how do we know the person's at risk of ingesting inedible objects? So is there a diagnosis of PICA? Mention that here. Have you observed situations where the person places these inedible objects in their mouth, or they have a history of swallowing certain things? You're going to write that here, describe it. Have objects been found in their bowel movements? Describe how often it's been seen. If it was one incident, if it's something that seems to happen periodically, you give information here that it helps people understand what they're looking for and what and why this is a problem. Does the person have specific objects that you believe that they favor? Are they looking for certain things that they're eating or placing in their mouth? You're going to describe that right here. Section 1, preventions. If you remember, all support documents must list preventative steps, things that we're doing to prevent. That's always our first and foremost goal. That's why it's Section 1 on the document, so that our first focus with the staff is to think about what we're doing to prevent this from happening in the first place. So we always include removing and keeping the environment free of all objects that the person could put in their mouth. Observe the person at all times for putting anything in his or her mouth. And an environmental scan of every place a person could access is expected, and then instructions for scanning the environment. What do staff need to know? How often should they check? Where should they check? Are there any other special instructions? List that here. And then there are, of course, sort of fill-in-the-blank spaces here if there's anything else you want to add. And I just want to make sure I had said, I'm not positive that I had said out loud, so I just want to take this opportunity to say, this exact form is not mandated to be used. It is provided as a tool for you, but it is not mandated to be used every time someone you know experiences pica or is at risk of ingesting inedible objects. This is here as a tool. You may already have something that you believe is meeting the needs of the person, and the ISP team believes is meeting the needs of the person. But at this point, this was released as a tool with points to consider that health issues advisory team believes belong in a pica protocol. Okay, so we talked about preventions. That's our first important step. Now let's talk about observable signs and symptoms of the problem. So this is one that, honestly, the committee, as I recall, had a little bit of a struggle because we just wanted to point out that often those signs and symptoms of pica can look the same as symptoms of constipation or even aspiration or various stomach problems. So if you're familiar with the ISP manual, you know that it has always said if someone is at risk, or at least in recent history, it has said that if someone's at risk of ingesting inedible objects or placing inedible objects in their mouth, you want to make sure that the support documents include instructions to monitor for blockage or perforation of the bowel. So what the committee has tried to do here is list out some of those identifiable symptoms that there was blockage or perforation of the bowel. So inedible objects are found in the BM. That would be an obvious sign that something had been eaten, right? Is the person refusing to eat? Has the person refused to eat for, and then you would fill in the blank with how many meals? And while I'm looking at that point, I had a good conversation with somebody who asked about this and said, does that mean, if we type, 3 meals, does that mean now we've never had to track every time the person eats a meal? Do we now have to track every time the person eats a meal just so we can show if there was a problem? And we talked about that with the licensing team, and the licensing team's response was the staff just need to be trained to document the exception, document the problem. So in this situation, staff would be expected to document that he didn't eat for 3 meals and then show that they're following this protocol. Other documentation that you expect would be up to you as an organization, but simply having this line here doesn't then mean that you have to be doing some sort of additional tracking just on a daily basis, if that makes sense. Here's a checkbox for if the person is refusing to eat or drink, if you think that could be a sign of or symptom of pica for this person. Abdominal pain with or without fever, spitting up, saliva or vomiting, a hard protruding abdomen, tender to the touch stomach, complaining of not feeling well or not wanting to get out of bed, go to work, or do things the person usually enjoys. These are just all of these general signs and symptoms, but things that could be an indicator of pica or of a blockage of the bowel. So walking stooped over if it's not usual for the person, excessive drooling in persons who don't normally drool. Now here we get to one other very specific point, and that is if the person has had no or only small stools in a certain number of days. So if you fill that out, notice this extra point here that says this must match any timelines indicated on a constipation protocol if present. So to say that another way, if the person already has a constipation protocol and it has that line checked that says has had no or only small stools in X number of days, these should match. We couldn't think of any situation where you would have a different response on different protocols, because how are the staff to know, well, this no or only small stool in 2 days was because of pica, but this one in 3 days was because of constipation, and follow which protocol do they follow? So we would expect that they would match, and they would essentially be following both protocols in that situation. Okay, so next up, section 3. What to do if any signs and symptoms are observed. These are steps to take if pica episode is witnessed or if signs and symptoms of pica are observed that do not require an urgent response, meaning we don't feel like we need to immediately call 911, but or it doesn't meet the criteria for 911 that are listed below. So, but we have seen some of those signs and symptoms. So what do we do? Who do we contact? And then you check the appropriate box. Who is it that the staff are expected to contact? Generally, in the field, staff are expected first to contact their supervisor, unless there is a nurse-client relationship in this case, and often then they're instructed to contact the nurse first. That's up to you and your organization and specific supports that you're providing. But check the appropriate box for your staff and your situation. Where should it be documented that they have contacted this person and what instructions it is that they are following? So supervisors are expected to know the situation, are expected to know about the support needs of the individual and to be able to advise staff on what other action they may need to take once they're advised of this, and or the nurse. If it's the nurse, where should we document that we contacted the nurse and what her or his instructions were and how we're following up on that. Typically in this situation we would see progress notes. Do we need to notify anyone else? So if this is a home protocol, do we need to notify work that we've observed this problem and let them know that we're monitoring? And then we need to, then the next instruction is to monitor bowel movements until the object passes. And then here's a place to indicate the specific time. Oops, excuse me. Let's get this back. Place to notify, to note the specific timeline for when we should notify the physician if we have not noticed the object passing after a certain number of days. So, whatever it is that you enter there, that's, oh, it keeps bouncing, excuse me. That's what staff would be expected to do. Okay, so there is section 3, a quick walkthrough. So now, let's talk about urgent response instructions. There's more information here in this section 4 than there are in any of the other protocols, because we've included criteria when you would need to call poison control or when you would need to contact the physician immediately, and the possibilities that you may choose to call the physician within 1 day. So, but let's start at the top. You'll recognize a number of these that are typical on most of these protocols, and frankly in any situation, whether the person has a protocol or not. The person is blue or not breathing, wheezing, working hard to breathe, person is having difficulty swallowing, they appear gravely ill, or you're concerned about their immediate health and safety. Again, we always call 911 in those situations. Person is severely coughing. Poison control. If the material swallowed might be a poison or is a medicine, call poison control and follow their instructions. And we've printed the number right on there for you, so there's no question. And Call the physician immediately if the individual has swallowed magnets, batteries, or any sharp object, or has developed a hard and painful abdomen. If you're unable to obtain medical care within an hour, it advises take to urgent care or emergency department. It just sort of spells out some expectations right there. And then the committee developing this believes that there may be some situations where the staff could be advised to call the physician within 1 day, and that could include, they were considering issues like threads from fabric, rocks, or if the physician has made any, this may be a problem that has been going on for years, and you may have discussed it with the physician, and the physician may have said, you know, when this happens, just make sure I'm aware of it. So you may choose to use, to fill out this box with some specific items. Are there any other situations where staff would need to call 911? List it here. After calling 911, contact and follow any instructions given from who? Who should staff contact? What? Generally, as I said above, typically staff are instructed to contact their supervisor. And then supervisor may assist with the various other notifications, such as services coordinator, family or guardian, physician, others, etc. Always, if we're calling 911, we would expect an incident report to be written. But then other things, other places staff would be expected to document. We would see that here. Okay, and of course, as all of any support document should have the name of an author. So who wrote this? We want to see that right there in that space. Okay. So there was a lightning fast walkthrough of the PICA protocol. As I mentioned, that is available on the OTAC website. If you have questions about that PICA protocol, you're welcome to submit them in the questions box here on the control panel of your webinar control panel. And I was just going to flip over to our website and show you on the ISP forms page. I'm going to let it load here. Here's the ISP forms page. And if I scroll about halfway down, you're going to find we have the PICA protocol. It was updated last month. I think I said February, but I guess I said that wrong. I think it was actually March 7th. There it is. So if you just click here, you'll be able to download the PICA protocol. That's how you can access it. Save it to your computer. You've got it. All right. I've got a couple of other things I was hoping to chat about today. So let me open my slideshow again. So we got a chance to walk through that protocol. Prior to this forum today, I chatted with Terry Rittner at the licensing unit and just said, hey, is there anything going on at the licensing team that the licensing team has observed recently that you think would be useful for us to talk about in the training today? And she rattled off several things that they've been seeing lately at some licensing visits. And one theme, a couple of issues, had to do with situations where a risk was being discontinued or a support document was being discontinued. So we thought we would take a minute to talk about some things to keep in mind for the ISP team as you are considering discontinuing a risk. So just to preface this conversation, I wanted to say the ISP team's goal is to provide just those supports that are needed to prevent serious health and safety concerns in a way that promotes as much independence and self-direction as possible. another way of saying that is we want to provide those important for supports, those supports, in a way that that addresses what's important to the person whenever possible. Whenever possible. It's not always possible, but whenever possible. So we are interested in discontinuing supports if they're no longer needed. But while we do that, we need to think carefully about why we're not seeing the problem anymore. And sometimes that can catch some people up. And I think we've seen a couple of examples recently where teams might not have thought through why they weren't seeing the problem anymore. So first of all, you want to think, if you're considering discontinuing a risk or removing a support document, think about, well, obviously, the support document, it makes sense. Are there supports still in place? Yes. But if you're thinking about removing a risk, are there supports still in place? In this example of seizures, is the person taking a seizure medication? There was an example recently where, I think a couple of examples recently, where a person, where a team decided to discontinue the risk of seizures because they had not seen seizures for so long, and then it turns out the person was actually taking seizure medication to address that. And if you remember, on the risk tracking record, there's a question that asks, is the person taking a seizure medication? So, we always look to that risk tracking record to make sure we're answering those questions before we are discontinuing a risk. But in other examples, are there supports, for example, within the behavior support plan for perhaps a behavior-related risk? Are there supports within the behavior support plan, maybe environmental supports or instructions for staff about how they interact with the person? Are there supports in place that have actually contributed to the fact that we're not seeing this behavior anymore? So we want to ask, are any supports currently in place? And then we want to ask, are the supports that are in place still needed? Right? As a framework for having this, for thinking about how to discontinue, I do refer to the ISP manual, page 63. It spells out a specific situation around seizure or behavior mental health risks, and how to go about discontinuing those. And I would just say you could follow a similar practice for any risk within the risk tracking record and support document that accompanies it. So it's in the manual, it says the team must have a discussion and document the results on a discussion record in the case of discontinuing a seizure risk or behavior or mental health risk. And what I'm proposing in this conversation is that it would be considered a good practice to document it for any risk that's discontinuing, but the must applies for seizures or behavior mental health risks. You would then change that yes to history for the appropriate RTR questions. And if this happens during a pre-meeting, you want to make sure it becomes an ISP meeting agenda discussion topic so that it comes forward to the ISP team. If it doesn't, if it just happens on its own, then make sure that issue gets forwarded to the team for the team to discuss, whether it's you're discussing by phone or you're having an email conversation about it, or whatever way the team communicates about changing needs of a person. So I want to recommend, I think about, I'll tell you how I think about it, and you can see if this works for you. I think about it in sort of a graded system of approach, or three different options. First of all, I would say, is the problem still happening? If the problem is still happening, you're going to want to keep things as they are or revise them as needed to adapt the supports as your understanding of the problem evolves. So maybe it's that the problem is still happening, but it's happening in a less severe or less frequent manner than before. So adapt the supports as needed to match match your understanding of the problem. Now, you're not seeing the problem happening. So if the team believes the issue is going away, you could consider peeling back supports slowly to see if the problem returns. If the team decides to follow this approach, we do recommend documenting the discussion on a discussion record and or the risk tracking record notes. So you might, if you had quite an array of supports, preventative steps in place, the team might agree that, hey, we're going to remove this limitation or this support and see how the person does while still providing these other supports. And maybe that's just where the person ends up staying for a while, but maybe you're just peeling back a few things if, again, this is just if the team believes the issue is going away. So that's a consideration for you. And finally, third option, if the problem is not happening at all and the team decides to go ahead and discontinue all supports, that's when you're going to change the yes on the risk tracking record to history. Or no if it's not one of the questions that has history as an option. If you are changing yes to no or history, then the expectation is that there are no more support documents in place. So if it was something that had been embedded within the behavior support plan, but the behavior support plan is continuing for other risks, then the part of the behavior support plan that was addressing this risk that is now discontinued would be removed or changed to be appropriate for today's understanding. So that was a quick look at, is that problem still happening? Yeah, we'll keep those supports. If you're not seeing that problem happening, but you want to start peeling back supports, you can try that approach. And if the problem is not happening at all and the team believes that it's time to discontinue supports, go ahead and do that. Change that yes to history. We do recommend that you note that on the RTR notes and or a discussion record within the ISP. So just as that final reminder, we only discontinue a risk if the support documents are also being discontinued. So we don't, for example, say, oh, he's no longer at risk of physical aggression, but we're still just going to keep that BSP in place that has these interventions for physical aggression. Nope, that's backwards. So as long as you believe that you still need those supports in place, then you're keeping that risk in place as well. And just a final reminder here about documenting. Document any team discussion that occurs or facts that contribute to the decision that the team made to remove any support document or risk. And you use that note section of the RTR or an ISP discussion record. All right, well, there was some conversation about discontinuing risks and or support documents. And if you come away from this conversation and want to continue, and maybe you talk about it with people where you work and have some more questions about this, Terry Rittner will be here in May, as I mentioned earlier today. Terry Rittner will be with us in May, and we'll be having conversation about issues of risk and support documents. So we'd love to address questions about this with Terry here. So you can hear it right from her. She's so good at explaining things, I believe, in a way that that is practical and just about documenting what you need to document, thinking about those things that are important as you're trying to provide good supports to the people we serve. All right. So with that, I forgot about that. It is ISP Mythbusters time, you guys, and we're going to launch into a couple of quick myths. Let's bust some myths. So let's take a look at myth number one, and I think Dan is standing by to trigger a couple of polls for us. Dan, if you could trigger poll question number 1 for us. Myth number 1, we're going to ask you, the financial plan mentions approval is needed for single purchases over a certain amount of money. So the myth number 1 says that means that a single purchase is considered all items on the receipt. Is that true or is that false? Go ahead and give your response right now. We're just going to have some conversation about this point. The way to give your response is actually right there on the screen. You just click on true or false and then submit it. So go ahead and submit your response right now. I'm going to open it up and see live what's going on. I see half of you have voted already, and votes are flowing in. So again, the financial plan mentions that approval is needed for single purchases over a certain amount of money. So if you had said single purchases over $100, does that mean if we go shopping and get the person a whole new wardrobe and there are 10 new shirts and 3 new pairs of jeans and 6 packs of socks and we spent $125, did we need to get ISP team approval for that purchase? And I see that almost all of you have voted on that issue, and so we're going to close that poll, and I'm going to show you what people have voted. 87% of you said false, and 13% of you said true. Hey, I'm going to go with the majority in this case. Yes, this is a myth that we want to keep busting for anybody who might be looking at it in a different way. The ISP manual as of 2011 does define that a single purchase is a single item, not all items on the receipt. So there is one myth busted. I need a great animation, and a voice busted comes in right now to bust that myth. Well, at least it's making me laugh on a Thursday. Myth number 2. All right, the Guardian is out of town and told us to go ahead and have that annual ISP meeting without them, but we cannot implement the plan until they get back in town to sign the ISP. That poll question is going to come up on your screen now. Go ahead and take a vote. Oh, looks like we're not triggering that poll yet. Oh, there it comes. Here comes the poll. So that Guardian is out of town and told us to go ahead and meet without them. But I believe we can't implement the plan until they get back in town to sign the ISP. Is that true or false? Once again, I see the votes are flowing in. Now you guys have figured out how to vote here. So we've got an even higher percentage voting now. Great. Good. Keep it up. Couple more of you. Submit your answer. What do you think? Take a stab. All right. I'm going to close that one, and I'm going to share it. Hey, I showed 90% said false. 10% said true. So what's the verdict there? Busted. The myth is busted. It is false. ISP manual on page 142 does give several ways that you can record the Guardian's approval, including via fax, phone, or email. Just remember that if you're getting the Guardian's approval in some other way, you do want to make sure to talk about the plan with the Guardian. Make sure that they're included in that development of the plan. Make sure that that you're still able to collaborate with them to the extent that they are able and willing, even though they may not be in the same city. Okay. Let's take a look at the next myth. Myth number 3. Autism appears in the DSM-IV, and therefore we have to mark the mental health condition question yes on the risk tracking record. There is a question in the risk tracking record that says, does this person have a mental health diagnosis? So we believe we need to mark yes on the risk tracking record. True or false? about it. And I'm seeing a different percentage of responses this time. People are thinking about this and approaching it thoughtfully, I'm sure. We'll give you a few more seconds to get your vote in. All right. With 85% of the votes in, we're going to close this poll. The higher voting percentage than we see in a lot of situations, unfortunately. Let's share. Here it is. Let's see. Here's your results. 29% of you said true, and 71% said false. So what does the Mythbuster say? Mythbuster says busted. ISP manual page 60 has a special note, and this just was added in 2011. So if you weren't up on this special note, this is your quick insider's tip. That the ISP manual on page 60 does note that a diagnosis of autism does not require marking yes for this question. So while the person may experience other mental health conditions that you may mark yes for, a diagnosis only of autism does not require you to mark yes for this question. All right, those were our 3 myths for the day. I am so glad to have had the opportunity, and boy, the busted voice has arrived. I don't know what to do about that. Hopefully that goes away. I don't know. Okay, so that leaves me to remind you about the ISP training resources page. Before I turn to questions, and I see a couple of questions have come in, I want to remind you about our ISP training resources page. And I'm going to flip right over here to that resources page. ISP training resources. And so just a reminder that what you'll find here, you'll find all of these various resources that we have. Some of them are videos. There are standalone training modules like making changes. If you have questions about when do you make a change, how do you make a change, can I write right on the form, or do I have to retype the whole thing? Use this training tool. It's self-guided, and it's sort of a decision tree. It asks you questions like, do you need this? And then it guides you through what form to use, which way to go, how you can make the change. So refer to that anytime you need coaching about what is required around making changes. So just a quick reminder of that as a resource. Let me turn back to my slideshow. So let's take a look at questions. If you'll give me just a moment, I'm going to sip some water, and I'm going to scan these questions that have come in and see what I can do, see what I can address. Todd asked a question, if a person puts an object in their mouth but does not ingest it, is it considered pica? Now, I'm not a medical expert, but from my understanding, that alone is not considered pica. It is, however, considered a serious and significant risk within the risk tracking record. So I believe that's question 51 in the risk tracking record, and it asks if the person places inedible objects in their mouth. So even if they don't ingest it, but they do put those inedible objects in their mouth, we still expect to see the same sort of supports. So you may still find that that pica protocol is an appropriate tool for you and your staff. So there's a quick answer to Todd's question. Let me see. Here is a question from Mandy. We have a person served that has a history of chewing on cigarette butts. We have not seen him chew on any cigarette butts in the past 2 years. When we inquired with his former housing group, they indicated he sought out and chewed on cigarette butts during the time he was quitting smoking. In the translation between their documentation and our documentation, he ended up with a pica diagnosis. However, his current physician has indicated pica is not a diagnosis for this person. Do we need to complete a pica protocol for him? Or can we complete some other kind of kind of guideline. So I'm not going to be able to make a determination based on this information with you about how the team needs to, what supports the team needs in specific. I would say if the team does need to respond to the RTR question. And the RTR questions 50 and 51 asks, number 50 says, does the person ingest inedible objects? And number 51 says, does the person place those inedible objects in their mouth? If the answer is yes, you do have to have supports, including monitoring for blockage and perforation of the bowel, which the PICA protocol does cover, and any other needed supports in place to prevent that problem from happening. Now, if the team believes this is no longer a problem, maybe you have talked it over with the physician. It may be that the team comes to the conclusion that you're going to mark that RTR question history. Once you decide to mark that history, that means you don't believe any more supports are necessary for that. Again, that's a conversation the team will need to have, and I won't be able to just make that determination for you. But those are your options, so I hope that's helpful. And so exactly what, if the team does decide that some other kind of guidelines are what are appropriate to watch for that issue, that does mean you're saying that the risk is still present, and so you would answer yes on the RTR. But once you answer yes, you're going to decide which supports are necessary. I would just say that for 50 and 51, the manual does explicitly require 2 components, and I actually haven't mentioned this yet in this conversation, so I'm glad this question came up. I have mentioned the blockage or perforation of the bowel. Whatever instructions you have must include that. You also must make sure that you must also identify the person as at risk of aspiration and choking, and have that protocol in place as well. So again, take a look at the ISP manual for in the RTR chapter under the question 50 and 51. It has specific instructions there about what you do if you're marking yes to those questions. Okay, long-winded answer. Got a couple more minutes for a few more of these questions. I'm now seeing more and more questions coming in, so if we're not able to get to your question today, I will just say that I will ask you to email me directly or submit a support request through our website or through the link that we provide in most of our mailings. Just get in touch with me if I'm not able to address your specific question in the conversation today. Let me just skip to the next question here. I see Sonia asked, can you have a PICA protocol in place if the person does not have a diagnosis of PICA? Yes, you can. You can. PICA is understood as a term that we use when the person has a history of ingesting inedible objects. So if that, for any reason, bothers you or you would prefer to call it something else, that's why, as I pointed out when we were looking at the protocol, there is space for you to remove the word PICA from the title of the document at least. You can change it to Ingesting Inedible Objects Protocol if you wish, but it would also be accepted to have something called a PICA protocol. I hope that's helpful, Sonia. Let me skip to the next one. This says, if the support for question 51 is covered in a safety plan, is it required to use the PICA protocol? Thanks, Dottie, for that question. I would say there are no circumstances where you're required to use this PICA protocol that I walked through today. The state has provided that as a tool, but you are not mandated to use this PICA protocol. You are expected to have, if you have answered yes to question 50 or 51, you are currently expected to have supports in place that help the staff prevent the problem from occurring, know what to do if the problem happens, and specifically include monitoring for blockage or perforation of the bowel, as well as that other issue of making sure that you've addressed aspiration and the potential for aspiration and choking for this person. So if you've covered all of that in your safety plan, that sounds like that could work. The PICA protocol is available as a tool for you to use if that makes more sense to you. It is a choice for you as a provider and in conversation with the ISP team supporting the person. Okay, so thank you, Dottie, for that question. Let me see, what's the next question? Here it comes. This one says, Susie says, PICA protocol section 1, the observations at all times. Can this be an option button? This question leads us to believe it says one-on-one or always in eyesight, which is not always the case, or level of supervision needed with a person diagnosed with PICA. Good question, Susie. I may not be able to answer that question today. I may have to take that back and or defer it to our conversation next month when Terry Rittner is here. But let me pull up that protocol, and let's look at section 1. So I can just, it says, you're saying here, observe the person at all times for putting anything in his or her mouth. Yeah, I'm going to have to defer to somebody else for that. So, and that's sometimes what I have to do, because I don't want to cause confusion by saying one thing when somebody else says something else. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to make sure that gets put on the conversation point for our conversation with Terry Rittner next month. So definitely join us next month so we can address that question. Somebody else, as Colin asks, why is the PICA protocol not mandated? That's a good question, and that it would be a question for Office of Developmental Disability Services. OTAC doesn't make decisions about what is required and what isn't. We are contractors with the state, and I haven't heard any conversation about why it was or why it was not required. So I'm afraid I'll have to defer on that one as well. I believe Colin works for a CDDP, a county, and so county services coordinators could absolutely have conversations with providers about whether or not they expect to see the PICA protocol in certain situations. So counties have conversations within your teams if you're expecting this protocol to be used. Let me see, what else? I do have another one here. This one comes from Mary. Mary says, a person has, regarding discontinuing risks. Great. So we're thinking about discontinuing risks. Let me read this here. Okay. A person has GERD, but the evaluation showed that it is well managed with medications, so he's not at risk for aspiration. What's the best way to show this on the RTR? Do we answer the question yes, but make a note in the note section if the PCP says he's not at risk, and then don't list it on the risks page? Very good and thoughtful question, Mary. Thank you for that. So let me think that through. And actually, to best answer that question, my advice always when it has to do with RTR, and this is just especially for me, is to, when in doubt, look at the RTR and make sure we're answering the questions. So I am going to look specifically at this question about GER. Question number 4, has this person been diagnosed with gastroesophageal reflux? Yes. Okay, so we are going to mark yes, and it's going to say yes if the person is at risk of GER. That is going to trigger a required evaluation to determine if the person's at risk of aspiration, which Mary says they had. They had a conversation with the physician, and the physician said, it sounds to me through Mary's response that the physician said, no, they don't believe this person is at increased risk for aspiration. If that's the case, then you can remove, you do not need to have aspiration on the ISP. You would continue to have this question marked yes. We would then expect to see, as I skip down here, to evaluations for aspiration or choking. We would list that evaluation type, conversation with physician. Date of evaluation was, oh, it was my birthday. And we're going to find that in medical visit forms. And so we would be able to go to that medical visit form to see more information, and/or we can make a note right here in the choking or aspiration choking area. We could make a little note that says, you know, for question 4, physician believes not at increased risk for aspiration because GER is well controlled. Does that make sense? So we're completing the loop. We're explaining what's happening, but we did have a conversation with the physician as required, and the physician did determine that the person is not at risk of aspiration. So I hope that helps, Mary. Of course, if you can always think of 28 exceptions, but I hope that process of walking it through was helpful. All right, that's about all the time we have for today, folks. So I thank you so much for joining us, and let me jump back to my slideshow. We want to get your feedback. So let me see. Do we have any feedback questions? We do. Dan, can we have some feedback questions now? If you can just take a quick minute and share with us how easy to understand was this information today. We want to hear it. Share that with us. We'll take just a couple seconds for that, and then we have one more question. And let's share that second question. Thank you, folks, for taking time to respond. And here comes our final poll question. Overall, how satisfied were you with the ISP forum today? Again, we thank you for your feedback. We will include in our follow-up email, we will have a survey link. If you have more detailed feedback about how the forum today worked for you, we would really appreciate hearing it. So do take time to complete our more detailed survey. But thanks for sharing some quick feedback with us right now. Okay, and with that, I want to remind you, I've been talking about our Terry Rittner visit next month, but here's some details. It's Thursday, May 23rd, 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's next month. We'll have a conversation with Terry Rittner. Registration is now open, so if you go to our ISP forum page today, you'll be able to register for that event. We'll be sending a pipeline announcing that a little bit later today. So, but you guys got to hear it first. We also now have all of our ISP forums for 2013 posted on our website. So do take a look at that. You'll see we've got some great topics coming up over the rest of the year. So you can get those all on your calendar and be ready to join us for the rest of 2013. Folks, I'm so glad you joined us. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Dan.
All right, thank you, Alan. Hey, just a quick reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and we will post it online by Monday at www.otac.org/ISP/forum for you to watch and share with others. So on behalf of the ISP and Person Centered Practices team at OTAC, thank you and have a great weekend. Goodbye, everybody.